Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Today, we have Irene Sim coming all the way from Australia to share all her magic and beautiful story with us. Irene, thank you so much for being here today.
And thank you, Vicky, for the opportunity to be on your show. And thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, you're most welcome. We're thrilled to have you. And I want to take a moment and just thank our audience. You're listening to us in over 48 countries, which means the world to us. And we're so grateful that you are listening and sharing our podcast with others. So thank you for that. And please keep doing so and leave us a review when you hear these important messages from the many different leaders that we have coming on the show. So let me tell you why Irene is here today. So Irene Sim is the managing director of the Coaching Alliance Group, as well as an industry accredited executive leadership coach, mentor, and facilitator. She has extensive senior organizational leadership experience. She knows that women are often held back by deeply ingrained, often invisible systemic gender biases, made more debilitating when overlaid with other forms of prejudices. Irene broke through the glass and the bamboo ceiling to become one of the first Asian women promoted to senior executive service of the Australian Treasury and the Australian Taxation Office. She coaches individuals on all stages of their journey to break free from societal biases, set their own terms, and thrive as powerful and authentic leaders. So, Irene, that is amazing. And thank you very much for joining us today. And you know what I really want to do is just have a conversation and give our audience an opportunity to have a sense of, what led you to where you are today.
Thank you, Vicky. What led me to where I am today as a coach is, professionally, as in your introduction, you said that I've had a lot of senior organizational experience, but actually what I'm doing today is as an executive leadership coach has resulted from a decision that I took after being more than, with the Australian Public Service for more than 20 years. Mm-hmm. I came to a crossroads and said, what would fulfill me? Mm-hmm. What would make me feel fulfilled, accomplished, and proud? And I decided that my journey through the private sector, through the public sector, has given me a lot of gems that I can share with others so that they can thrive much earlier in their career than I have, right? So back to your question, what's led me to today is really a series of defining moments in my life, and that started when I was 10 years old. 10 years old. Yeah, so I was the eldest daughter of a single mother in Malaysia at a time when single mothers were not a thing, not an acceptable thing, I'm ethnically Chinese. I'm a member of a minority race in Malaysia where I grew up and in Australia where I live now. At 10 years old, I got to practice speaking up to power. I mean, I didn't know I was doing that then, but I had to speak up to power on my mother's behalf when she went through a messy divorce. And, I know nowadays we do say, leave the children out of it and everything, but I wasn't left out of it. I spoke the official language in Malaysia and my mother didn't. So I had to do, on her behalf, speak to lawyers, to government officials, to judges, to protect our family home, which was, at risk. So I started off as a translator for my mom. My mom says this and everything. And then eventually I started having opinions about it, and I became an advisor to my mom and helped us secure that home that we couldn't afford to lose. So that's, I think, a defining time in my life that when I look back, and many times I've looked back at that and thought, I did that. I did that.
So young, like at such a young age, you were already stepping into your leadership and your own authentic power.
Yeah, without realizing it,
Yeah.
right? And then later, the second sort of defining time was when I migrated to Australia. And my experiences in my early career as a woman, as an
Mhm.
immigrant who speaks with an accent, in Australia, who's quite predominantly white, in the workplace, in the professional workplace, I experienced feelings of not fitting in, you know.
Mm.
And you know what? People were lovely. It's not that people were not, but something was in the air or something. Things would happen, and I would have this icky feeling in my gut, that I didn't quite fully understand. Um, that I just didn't belong, and I didn't understand the jokes. People would laugh at things and talk about sport, and I didn't understand. And all I knew was that this is weird, and somehow I didn't fit in. So that led to me being held back in my career,
Mhm.
you know, in the form of not putting myself forward for opportunities or
Sure.
waiting for others to tell me I'm good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then there's a third defining time, which is kind of a response to this, when I had stomached enough of that icky feeling and things started to change when I lost patience.
Mm.
Fundamentally, I remembered who I was at 10 years old. And I decided that I wasn't going to bother about fitting in.
Wow, that's wonderful.
Yeah, so I decided that to use that voice that I practiced since 10 years old to speak to power,
Yeah.
and to back myself. And that looked something like asking for opportunities. That looked like saying to the boss, I want to have a go at this, Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and that looked like not asking for permission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. Love
Those
that.
are the defining.
Well, and those are phenomenal uh learning experiences, difficult when you were going through it, of course, because when you're a young child trying to navigate your parents' divorce and talking to people of, political power or legal power, like that's very scary no matter what age you are, right? And so you've learned how to navigate those things, and even this feeling of not belonging, like that's incredibly hard when you're young and you're trying to figure out how to navigate all these complexities that are around us. And that's really, I thought it'd be really important for us to have a conversation with you because you've lived these experiences and understand that imposter syndrome is a very real phenomenon that many of us encounter. And so you found the guts, you found the courage to go up against that. So what do you think is the biggest reasons that people struggle to overcome that, Irene?
I think the biggest reason is probably because we don't realize that we have that power over that voice in our heads.
Yeah.
I should tell you the voices in my head that was the result of all these moments,
Mhm.
right? So the answer to your question is actually people don't know,
Yeah.
or we think that
Mhm.
that is part of us, it's an integral part of us, and it will always be the case.
Mhm.
Yeah, and when I decided that I didn't want to be like that anymore, and that I wanted to honor who I was capable of being, I had, a decision is a decision, but then I had to find a way forward, right? And then I
Mhm.
started realizing these voices. Okay, the voice in my head, sometimes the voice of my mother,
Uh-huh.
sometimes,
Yes.
yeah, so the voice of teachers. I grew up in Malaysia, so I was basically marinated and I don't think I'm alone in this. I think women really have been marinating in these social expectations of
Mm.
how we should be, how
Oh,
we
yes.
who we, what we ought to be, and marinating in all of that, so much so that we internalize
Mhm.
those messages and we make them our own. And the voices that I found was limiting me to be that person who just wanted to fit in and make it easier for other people and don't make trouble, you know. So some of the messages I think your listeners might be able to relate to. So I call that voice my inner critic.
Mhm.
I gave my voice a name. My voice, I mean, as a technique for distancing myself.
Of course, yes. What's your name? What name did you give your voice?
My voice is called Eeyore from Winnie.
E Oh, really?
Winnie
Eeyore.
the Pooh. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a lovely character, but
Yes, yes.
he's the downside of things, quite sad, quite pessimistic sort of voice.
Mhm.
But my Eeyore speaks with a Chinese accent.
Okay.
The voice of my mom, and also has a Chinese disposition, a culturally Chinese disposition, like be humble, don't be
Mhm.
a show off,
Mhm.
be nice, don't make others uncomfortable,
Mhm.
be a good girl, don't make me lose face, me being maybe my mom, maybe my teacher, you
Mhm.
know. Be grateful. You are so lucky already. Don't be greedy and ask for more.
Yeah. That's so true. Oh, so yes, I'm sure our audience can completely relate to many, if not all, of those, you know, sayings and voices. Yes.
Oh, and to your Cantonese speaking audience, they might be able to relate to Tang Wa, which is Cantonese for comply.
Oh.
Comply. Listen to your mother.
Mhm.
Tang mama the wa, or guai meaning be good, don't make trouble, you know. And then there's this comparison thing. Others can do this, why can't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
That's
And
not fair.
yeah,
Yeah.
and and then there's the fear. Don't fall down. Don't climb that tree. Oh, keep your dress clean.
Hmm.
You
Yeah, you
know,
might get hurt.
might get hurt.
You might fail or fall.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And
Yeah.
what do we say to our sons? Let's see how high you can climb that tree.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
So
go further. Exactly, exactly. So Irene, what you're saying is completely, I agree with you so much. And I think that's common in a lot of societies. Like it's not
yep.
intentional to
Yeah.
but it has a lasting impact. And so how does that impact our lives when we're feeling like an imposter or if we're going against the grain or the society norms or expectations?
So I would say, and I think your listeners can probably relate to this, constantly looking over our shoulder to see whether
Mhm.
someone's going to be calling us out, you know? I have to admit, I'm here as your guest on this podcast. I can't believe my luck. I'm enjoying the opportunity of being of service today. But then the imposter is speaking to me. It spoke to me before I, got onto this call. It's like, who do you think you are?
Mm,
Constantly, it's still there.
yeah.
Um, and of course, the strategy then is to move out of it. But the being afraid like that means constantly looking back to see if anyone's going to call you out, and then you doubt yourself, like I doubt myself, but I'm leaning into it and I want to just make a difference, you know. And also the voice that says, yeah, right, whatever it is that you're saying, other people can say it better.
Mm,
So that's how I experience the imposter, and I No, with the many, many women that I coach from different ethnic backgrounds, the lot of it, actually, as you said, it doesn't matter which culture you come from. We all have a version of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And it takes courage. And you started demonstrating this at the age of 10, finding your voice. And, I think what you just shared there, Irene, is really important is even when you have lots of experience in making that imposter syndrome your friend, or that inner critic your friend, you still can get it. And it doesn't mean in every aspect of your life. It can even be in certain aspects of your life, right? And so it's, some of that is, how do we start to exercise that authority without feeling like an imposter, or finding that courage to do it anyway. Lean into it. Like you came in here beautifully today sharing, how you've experienced it. So how does our audience find that courage to lean in and go for it?
Yeah. Well, the first thing to do is to call it out.
Mm.
So that's why I called it out today.
Yeah.
I think with many things, we suffer it alone, thinking that we are the only ones
Absolutely. Yeah.
when we are not the only ones. And with the imposter especially, we know research tells us that actually the high achieving people suffer it a lot. Very accomplished people suffer it too. Actually, I should call out what the word I use, suffering. Yes, it is uncomfortable and it is kind of suffering, but this is not a disease.
Yeah.
It's pervasive. It happens to people who care, and all of us care. We
Yeah.
care about the difference we are making in the world. So first thing, call it out. And that's showing vulnerability to say you are not alone. I I experienced that too. And the second step is this is what I coach my clients to do, to lean into the intelligence of your emotions to deal
Mm.
with those limiting voices. So what I have coined is this four-step process to lean into those emotions. It's called the ABCD
Okay.
process.
ABCD. Okay.
All right. A is acknowledge and accept
Mm.
emotions. Okay. Often we experience this thing and we don't know what it is, and it gets all the power because we don't acknowledge it. We don't want to say we're nervous, we're anxious, we're worried, and and all these thoughts are swirling through our heads. And often we actually give ourselves a hard time for feeling those things as
It's
if we
true.
are not. Yeah. And we are allowed to feel those things because we know where those voices are coming from now. Feel it, acknowledge, and then accept
Yeah.
ourselves and accept those emotions.
Nice.
And then there's B for breathe. Take a deep breath, pause. And that's to slow things down because by slowing things down, we are buying ourselves time
Yeah.
to make conscious choices
Yeah.
about how we are going to move forward. And then we're ready for the next step, which is C. Choose your thoughts that focus on the service that you're going to bring, the difference you're going to make in the world, or in your workplace, or in the project, or on this podcast where I want to share this with your listeners.
Mm.
Right? So
I love
choose.
that.
Yeah. So I tell myself, I am here to do my best to share this with others so that they have a way forward.
Mm-hmm.
Experience the imposter. Okay, so choose those thoughts, ignore the Eeyore thoughts, or
Yeah.
gently park the Eeyore thoughts, and notice the Eeyore thoughts focus on me,
Yeah.
right? So park those thoughts and say, it's not about me, it's about the difference I'm going to make in the lives of the people who are listening to this podcast, or the people that I'm working with on this project, or the outcomes that we are after by doing this thing together.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah.
Right? So when we choose those thoughts, we notice a shift in our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I'll encourage everybody to experiment, right? And finally, D means do. Do. Accordance, act in accordance with the thoughts that you have chosen, the focus that you have given yourself through C.
Yeah. Love it. I love it. And then you have no regrets.
Yes. Failure, and then you can marvel. And actually, there's another step. So you do this, you marvel at what happens.
Mm.
And you must celebrate. Celebrate, celebrate, celebrate.
And
Because
we don't do enough of that, do we?
yes, yes. Celebrate that, like now I'm celebrating that I've had a chance to make a difference in your world, in this world that we share.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
So I would encourage everyone to maintain a journal and jot down every single moment of courage like that when you've done the ABCD, even when you have failed. Because you do A and then you B and then you go, oh, all right, I didn't follow through. Next time I will, I'll celebrate that I did A and B.
Yeah.
Then I can celebrate thinking of C, but maybe not doing D. And then you'll see yourself move through all of that. It's like strengthening a muscle, the more you do it, the stronger and the more automatic that'll become.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Those are great tips, because sometimes when you're in it, you're right, our brains are going so fast that we don't catch up here. Right. And so even when you were talking about breathing, like that is so important to remember, because we're just like so quick in our world today. And that gives you a chance to reset that parasympathetic nerve so you can actually think different thoughts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. Awesome.
And that thing is powerful if you notice. So I'll invite everyone to listen to to find their version of my Eeyore,
Mhm.
hear what they're saying. And chances are all those messages, a lot of those messages that hold us back are about us,
Yeah.
how we're not good enough, or how, we should be afraid of failure. It's all about us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, Irene. And it was funny when you were saying that, because I have that inner critic too. And I call her my queen bee because she knows everything. I know nothing.
Yeah, Queen Bee.
She's the queen
Maybe.
bee. And I made
Yeah.
a visual of her, right? So that I had her on my desk for a long time. I was able to get rid of her eventually. But it's important, because to your point about naming it and recognizing what it is, and you can actually turn that into your cheerleader versus the one who's trying to keep you playing small, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned the cheerleader, because I've taken it one step further, and I call her my inner champion, and
Mm,
I've named her too. You want to know what
nice.
champion is?
What's her name?
Moana.
Oh, I love it.
Like that, she takes up space. She's full of love,
Yeah.
and she's brave.
Yeah.
So Moana has a script now, and I focus on Moana. What would Moana say?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
very powerful. And I hope our audience, that was a great demonstration that Irene just shared with us, because it takes you from that naysaying to really championing you to make those choices, as she talked about, make the right choices for you that can serve in a much bigger, broader way. So Irene, like, this is very powerful, like really powerful. So what what's next for you? You've been really championing individuals, and you and I were talking a little bit about this next chapter of how you do even more of this. Do you mind sharing just a little bit about that?
Oh, not at all. So yes, I've been working with women to lead on their own terms,
Mhm.
right? So that's a response to all those limiting beliefs and other people's expectations of how we ought to be. So I've been working with women to use their emotional intelligence to lead on their own terms. And I have really enjoyed seeing the women thrive and flourish like that. They're unstoppable. But recently, I have turned my attention to the system. So
Mm.
yeah, the system. So when we have a system, and in Australia, we do have the system, and I've got clients in different parts of the world, no difference there.
Yeah.
Where there is gender inequity, we all know this story, and we are all probably listening to this podcast for this reason. We know that women are not represented in leadership and in organizations. And also, often women, when they are in that environment, they have to fit in, try and fit in. But
Mm-hmm.
so I have been working with men. I started a movement only recently, called the Allies to All Women in Leadership Network. And this is a community of practice where I invite men and women who are willing to recognize their privilege and to use that privilege to level the playing field for those who are less privileged. So women of all colors, and all sorts, and women facing all sorts of other intersectionality issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm really excited because we are having our inaugural network meeting in a few days' time, and we've got men coming to the fore, attending this event to learn about practical everyday actions that they can take to be allies to others.
Yeah, I love that. And when you were sharing with me earlier, you were talking about the allies in action and
Yep.
how important that is, right? And I witnessed this myself in my own practice because I was always just, I focus primarily on women, and I have a lot of men now that I'm coaching and working with. And I saw I think it was last May when I was doing a live event, it was the first time we had 50-50 representation. I know, right? And the men were leaning in and they're asking questions like, how do we be better allies? Like, we don't like this divide that's happening. So how do we become better allies? And so, kudos to you, Irene. This is great that you've started this, and you're nurturing. How do we have more allies to support, if we, especially when we have privilege, like, we have to be able to help others.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as women, we have privilege too. I have privilege,
Yes.
right? So whatever, we have privilege in different ways, but the system is not going to change until the people who have privilege are part of the deal. They are part of the process of change so that all of us can be better off,
Yeah.
right? Hey, Vicky, maybe one day you and I can work on something together to
Well,
really expand this idea that, ally actions, everyday actions,
yeah,
they are the actions that are going to make a difference,
absolutely.
at a time.
Absolutely. And it's so funny that you say that, Irene, because so often people sit back and they say, well, what can I do? And you can move mountains. It's the micro steps that turn into macro movement. And so I love how you shared that, because one step at a time, right? Like that's how we make positive change that can impact all of us. And we've got to move away from this society where everything is about scarcity and really understanding there is enough for everybody. And so, share those gifts, share those, the different ways you can have an impact. I
Yes,
love that.
yes.
Yeah.
And Vicky, you use that word again. I mean, when we talked before, you talked about that. That's enough for everybody. That's
Yeah.
the abundance mindset. And I love that that's central actually, it's to the way you're thinking. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yes, my pleasure. And I believe if we don't change that mindset from everything scarce, it makes it more difficult to move into a place where we do want to be, where everybody can be thriving. It does, because one person wins does not mean somebody else has to lose, right?
Yep.
There can be win-win. And
Yes.
yourself, myself, we're all working toward, how do we help support others to realize the gifts and talents that you bring to the world, and being very purpose and service driven becomes really important. Yeah.
Yes. And that way you build an ecosystem,
Yes.
you know,
Yeah,
where
exactly.
right. So instead of focusing on me, I'll focus on supporting others, and then it goes through and the system becomes one of mutual support.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly.
Yeah.
Not easy. We know this, audience. We know it's not easy, but it is doable, right? And so, that would be what I think is a really important message for everybody to understand. We're not we don't say this just for the sake of saying it. We know it takes and requires work. It requires you to do internal work, and it requires us to do a lot of external work. So when Irene, you talked about the systems are massive. And those systems, we're seeing some of them break down. And so that becomes very important that you're ready and that you've done the internal work to
Yes.
be able to counter the system breakdown. Yeah.
Yes. And that's another reason I do this, and it's totally selfish. I get a lot of joy from seeing, the spark in people when they go, oh, I see myself as powerful.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I can do things. So for me, the selfish reason is that I love seeing people, spark up like that. Yeah. And also the men, seeing them spark up like that, because what some of the features of culture are not serving men either.
Yes.
It's not
Correct.
a we're currently often in a lose-lose situation where everybody loses, really.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. And that's an important cycle to break and to start to shift. Yeah. So Irene, I know we're getting close to time here. So how do people find you if they want to be part of your networking, or if they want to connect with you on LinkedIn, or
Yes.
any of your social channels? Maybe share where they can find you.
Find me on LinkedIn, Irene Sim, and executive leadership coach. And I was going to say I look like that, and I realized this is a podcast. So Irene Sim, executive leadership coach, and that's the best way to connect with me.
Mhm.
I'd love to have a conversation with people, even if it's to just so you're not alone.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
to share experiences, and of
Yes.
course, I'd love to support you in any way I can.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Irene, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. And, I know it's early in Australia, late in Toronto, but we're grateful that we have the ability to, speak to people from around the world and share your insights. So thank you very much for being here with us today.
And thank you very much for the opportunity, Vicky, and for the work that you do.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you. And I want to take a moment and just thank our audience. I know you get to pick and choose what podcast you listen to, and we're super grateful when you chime into the Women in Leadership Talk podcast. Please do leave us a review. If you have questions about today's episode, you can reach out to Irene directly. You can reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. And also, if you're questioning your leadership, On the Will Empowered website, that's Will Empowered with 1L, we have a free leadership quiz that you can take, and that'll give you some insight as to how you're showing up as a leader. And we love having, our listeners take that so that they get some insight as to, who they are and how they lead. And you can lead in lots of ways in your life. So be sure to go and check that out at wilempowered.com. And so, Irene, thank you again. I'm super grateful to you for being here. And our guest, she's been a fabulous guest for us today. And our audience, we hope to see you on the next Will Talk podcast. So take care, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.
You. Bye.